All right, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Cindy Smith, and we're very glad you could join us today as we share our thoughts on leading out of crisis with agility. The Agile model improves effectiveness. We'll be recording the session today, and you'll be receiving a copy of the slides after the fact. So today, after an introduction to the Agile model and programs, we'll provide a debrief for the Leadership Agility Profile Assessment, and that's of particular interest for those of you who are able to complete it prior to today's session. Next, we'll explore how to apply the Agile model to improve transformation success, and finally, we'll take a look at the After Action Agility Program for COVID-19, which is a powerful tool for our times. Next slide. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Nick Horney, who's been deeply involved and recognized for innovations in organization agility theory and practice, a sample of which you'll see today, as well as Gail Severini, who is a seasoned execution executive who has partnered with business leaders to deliver their strategies for more than 20 years now. Today also, we've reserved a generous amount of time for questions after the presentation, so please record your questions in the chat box. You can address them to me, and we'll address them when we come to the apportioned time. So let's first set the stage for today's discussion. I don't often quote politicians, but the Canadian contingent used one of my favorite quotes in their 2018 Davos speech. It goes like this: "The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again." And like every good politician, they then highlighted the enormous opportunity and the enormous potential in that realization, with which I agree. I'll bet this potential, though, is hard for leaders to perceive right now. Over the past few years, there's been much talk about our VUCA, environment and change, but it's all seemed so academic, until March, that is, when almost within the blink of an eye, COVID-19 forced an entire global workforce to shift to a new world of work where everything is changing. The who, the what, the when, where, and especially how of work. So we all experienced the cold realization that not only is VUCA not academic, it's real, it's here, and it's likely not the only or last time we will have conditions such as this to work in. It has sparked a global crisis under which the old ways of doing things will no longer be effective. And I suspect you're all feeling the impacts of these new dynamics and are seeking a way to improve the effectiveness of your leaders, your teams, and your organizations given this new reality. But we can't blame COVID-19 solely for our situation. Concurrency of change is ever present and growing and has led to the 21st century ailment we know as change fatigue. Even prior to the current pandemic, next slide, 85% of executives surveyed in 2018 saw a significant change in the trajectory, the speed, and the scale of change in their businesses compared to that of the past few decades. Just think about the implications of that data point, given the extent to which our world has changed over the past 30 years. You'll see on the right-hand side, we've noted just a few of today's changes that you may be dealing with that are contributing to the complexity, the chaos, and the crises of confidence reflective of the current business environment. Digital disruption, talent gaps, Brexit, global trade, supply chains, diversity and inclusion, pandemics, and most of all, virtual work environments. We have little choice but to accept this reality. However, next slide, 91% of executives saw the need for agility as the pace of change accelerates. But only 75% have not yet introduced current measures to address this vital need. So why not? Is it due to the internal barriers such as survival mentality, office politics, siloism, lack of leadership alignment or buy-in? Likely yes, all of the above. Maybe though, like the proverbial elephant eater, they just need a clear, solid, proven effective starting point. Peter Drucker said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It's to act with yesterday's logic." So let's bring Nick on to explore some new logic, some new practices that are proven to be effective in the shift to agility. Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate that. I appreciate laying the context and a little bit of context in terms of why I even began this quest. Back the end of 2001, and many of us remember where we were towards the end of 2001 when 9/11 occurred. I was at the Center for Creative Leadership and really involved in a good bit of focus on leadership research and the delivery of approaches to leadership development, et cetera, and really enjoying that time. When 9/11 occurred, it was a shock to me as well as many others, and I hence began the quest for really finding an approach, a framework, et cetera, that really equips leaders, teams, and organizations to build the capability to deal with ongoing disruptions. Yeah, it doesn't make any difference if it's a particular disruption, and certainly we're all experiencing COVID-19 and all of the varying disruptions that that's causing. But how do we build capability with leaders, with teams, with organizations, so that in fact, yes, it's still going to be a disruption, but how can we better prepare for that? How can we anticipate the changes that are going to be coming as part of that disruption? And how can we actually build capability internally so that, yes, there is some disruption, but maybe it's not as bad as it really could have been. A couple of years ago, my business partner and I wrote a book about focused, fast, and flexible, really a way of applying the Agile model at both an individual leader level, a team level, and an organizational level. So my discussion over the next few minutes will really talk about just that. So let me dive a little bit deeper in terms of the Agile model itself and what it represents. And for all of you and I know you have your share of models and frameworks, et cetera, but fortunately, the Agile model, A-G-I-L-E, actually is kind of the essence of it. The model, it does spell Agile. You can see there that around the perimeter of the model is anticipate change, generate confidence, et cetera. And I'm going to drill into each one of those a bit more in depth. And the idea, again, remember, is the focus is on building capability with individuals, with teams, and organizations to be able to adjust and adapt, to ongoing change, not a particular change, but build that capability to adjust and adapt to ongoing change. So if we start with the A, and anticipating change, it's really made up of the whole capabilities of visioning, sensing, and monitoring. And oftentimes we find that, yes, we all collectively basically understand the vision of where our organization is moving, but maybe we don't do quite as good a job of sensing the trends and the patterns, et cetera, to really understand or even in monitoring those, so that when COVID-19 was in its infancy, if it ever was in an infancy, because now it's a pandemic, but when it was earlier on in the stages, for those of us that had the lens of the Agile model, you're starting to at least collaborate with others about anticipating change. How do you collaborate with your employees, your peers, your suppliers, your customers, et cetera, in terms of what are the potential impact that this pandemic may have? That's part of what anticipating change is all about. So as Cindy was mentioning, it's not just the pandemic. It doesn't have to be on the order of a pandemic, but it can be anything from cybersecurity to working now more virtually, et cetera. How do we anticipate the changes that those things are going to bring about? Generating confidence is the next element of this, and it doesn't necessarily have to go in this sequence. It's not sequential, more of a systems model. But generating confidence is more than self-confidence. It is how do you build confidence with others? How do your peers, how do you establish confidence with them, your suppliers, your business partners, and others, so that in fact what you're really trying to do is to let them know that you do have, you are anticipating some of the changes that are going to come about. You're engaging and involving them in that process too of how do we deal with this, how do we address it, et cetera, through clear communications, the appropriate communications, the face-to-face type of communications, et cetera. And how do we really get aligned around the changes that are coming our way? The third is initiating action, and you'll see the components, the capabilities in that: a bias for action, decision-making, and collaborating. Oftentimes we'll find when we do organizational assessments and when we do individual leader assessments, we'll find that there tend to be two areas where there's often a weakness. we find that there's often a weaker area in terms of decision making, because decision making within organizations often is not clearly spelled out. One department may say, yes, you're engaged and empowered, go make the decision. Another part of the organization may say, okay, bump it up a couple of levels. A particular industry sector may be more risk averse and really require a couple of level increase. The degree to which employees are engaged, they're focused, they understand the vision, et cetera. How do we bring down as much of the decision making to that front line as possible so that we can be quicker to be able to deal with changes that are coming our way? The other area that we find as the Achilles heel of most organizations is the area I've already mentioned around anticipating change. We tend to be better firefighters. We tend to be better as organizations and as leaders, et cetera, to deal with change once it lands at our doorstep, as opposed to doing all of the heavy lifting and the work to identify trends and patterns, do scenario planning in terms of what are the potential things that could occur, so that in fact you're out in front of the change and ahead of that. The fourth element is liberate thinking. That really is an area that really says for leaders and organizations, how do we build a kind of environment that says we want you, because you as employees deal with customers, deal with our partners, our business partners, you deal with our suppliers day in and day out. And maybe you've done the same thing day in and day out for a couple of years now. We really want your thoughts and your ideas in terms of how can we do it better? And are there some ways that we can actually allow for some risk taking, clearly within certain boundaries, but how do we encourage our front line to be able to take those kinds of risks and focusing in on innovative ideas and also the concept of idea diversity? Where are we getting points of view and perspectives that are very different from ours? And that's the liberate thinking component. The fifth component is evaluate results. It's metrics, it's fact-based measures. It's also the one-on-one of creating and establishing the kinds of expectations that you have of your team and being able to provide on an ongoing basis real-time feedback that is not a surprise, and you don't wait till an annual performance review, per se. So that's the deep dive of the Agile model. And again, as I emphasized before, the Agile model applies both at an individual level, team level, and an organizational level. It's just a different context. So let's take a quick look at the individual level. And I've created a couple of fictitious quick self-assessment results. And one is Kumar's self-assessment, the other is Susan's. And I'll compare, maybe contrast the two. Kumar, if you're looking at the length of the bars, and the colored bars are basically what his responses were, essentially you'll find that Kumar really strong in terms of anticipating change, really gets out in front, studies a lot of things externally, communicates with a lot of colleagues, et cetera, that are out in the same industry as well as different industry. And so he really feels like he's got a handle on the newness, the fresh thinking that's coming along. And he also feels like he achieves pretty good results, as you can see down in the yellow bar towards the bottom. The others, though, in terms of generating confidence and initiating action, liberating thinking, he's doing this. Kumar is really relying mostly on himself. So one of the things that I would probably do as a coach for Kumar is to say, well, let's take a look at how you get others involved and others engaged and involved in this, and how they can also become better at anticipating change, et cetera, since you'll have some skill sets in that area. Susan, on the other hand, is weaker in the area of anticipating change, but has real strength in terms of generating confidence and liberating thinking, et cetera. And so she really knows how to get things done through people and collaborating with others. If I were coaching Susan, one of the things I would say to concentrate on is, how do you get exposed to what's happening in other areas, and even other areas and not only other business units, but even under other industry sectors that you can often gain a tremendous amount of information from and be able to apply that to your industry sector. When you take that information, those are just two individuals, and let's say this is an example of an organizational heat map. And for those of you that have worked with heat maps in the past, you're basically aggregating information and looking at where there are strengths, which are the greener areas, and where the weaker areas, which are in red. And so in this case, and depending upon the demographics you collect, I'm showing an example of directors and managers comparison across. Let's assume there were 100 people that completed the leadership agility profile. So this is in essence some form of a needs identification in terms of what are the areas that we need to focus in on first and foremost. Where should we place our emphasis, our investment of dollars and time? In this particular example, you'll see that monitoring is an area that it's the last 5 bars, colored areas. And you'll see that those are some of the weaker areas, as well as fact-based measures. So you might work together to identify what are some tools, techniques, approaches, et cetera, that we can not only reinforce the sensing and the visioning that we seem to do pretty well, but how do we enhance that with the ongoing monitoring and the data collection and the data analysis, the analytics that needs to go into the fact-based measures. But that's an example of how you can take at an individual level the leadership agility profile as an example, aggregate that across others within your organization, and then look at differences. Look at differences by level, look at differences by functional area, look at differences by geography. Going even deeper, let's say now we've got certain leaders within our organization, and it could be a project manager, it could be someone at the C-suite that you say, okay, let's delve a little bit deeper and really understand the strengths and developmental needs for this individual in terms of enhancing his or her leadership agility. This is an illustration of a spider diagram of our leadership agility 360. 360 assessment. And as many of you know, it takes into account self-assessment, supervisor, peers, direct reports, and even others. Others could be your suppliers and even clients. And so what you're looking for is, where are the gaps? Where are the big gaps? And one of the things that I find in a gap in this illustration is that this particular individual, their self-report, they reported a 5.0 on every single element of the Agile model. Now, we find that to be a fairly rare occurrence, so it probably says a lot about what's the self-insight this person has about their strengths and developmental needs. And you can see that from some of the other information in the spider diagram, and you look for gaps. And the whole importance of this is being able to sit down with this individual and work with him or her in terms of identifying what are the capability areas, whether it's visioning, it might be aligning, et cetera, based on this data, and then identifying what are the groups where that person may need some improvement in, and maybe work more with peers, maybe work more with direct reports, et cetera. But it really provides a more precise look at areas that person can improve in. And the Leadership Agility Development Guide is a support document, a book almost. It's 60 pages that have developmental recommendations that can be utilized in your coaching with this particular individual. And we've used that now for about close to 20 years, and we find that it's a much deeper, more in-depth view in terms of someone's leadership agility. Just to share with you, you can draw upon a number of resources. I know that Cindy and Gail have done this in terms of being able to tap into what are some resources for being able to do executive coaching and individual leadership agility development. We've got things organized into 4 practice areas. One focuses on the kinds of tools and techniques available for leadership agility. Another in the area of team agility and high-performing teams. The other practice area is organizational agility, mostly around transformation of organizations. And then the 4th really underlies all 3 of those, 3 others. It's really about agility analytics. It's the measurement, it's the tools, it's the assessments, et cetera, that become part of that. and just the vast majority of the things we do, and you probably do as well, they're based on data, based on information, so that we can identify the gaps and know where we need to be doing the work. So as an illustration, some of you might be interested in getting certified in one of the various tools. The quickest one and easiest one, as an example, is the Leadership Agility Profile Self-Assessment. And it all can be done online in terms of certification. You actually complete it yourself. I would spend some time going over the review of that, how you see yourself in terms of strengths and developmental areas, refer you to the development guide, ways of taking a look at that, and then get into step 3 in a separate Zoom meeting or other appropriate type of virtual meeting to be able to share then with you other information about how this is administered, how you utilize it for coaching purposes, et cetera. The 4th step is really in preparation. How do we prepare you then to meet with the first person that you're going to be providing feedback to with their leadership agility profile? So it is that mentoring, that coaching that occurs at that level. So let me hand it off to Gail, who will then be sharing a bit more about the complementary areas of change management and agility and how she's found it useful in her practice. Gail?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, my work is mostly focused on transformation. And I found some ways to incorporate this in my work, and that's really what I wanted to share today. To do that, I really wanted to think about where we are in the evolution of how we do transformation. 20 years ago, we were already talking about nimble organizations and the speed of change. And then we were really implementing maybe a few major changes a year. However, gradually, due to market pressures and big strategies, we all know the pace of change has been accelerating. And some of those showed up on Cindy's chart earlier in this presentation. Globalization, digital disruption, we were talking about those 2 years ago. However, they've continued to evolve, and now other major changes compound those, including COVID. So when I think about how we execute today, and I think about the experience of the teams that we work with, I think about how many changes are they experiencing every day. I'm working at the portfolio level today with a functional team of about 100 that is delivering about 20 large concurrent changes. When I think about them, I think about these leaders and subject matter experts that have day jobs. And in addition to that, each of them is engaged in executing on multiple changes. This is not a blip. I think we used to think it was, but we now realize that it's not, but we haven't really changed the way we operate. This is our new normal, if you will. So we've all been innovating our disciplines. Nick mentioned the Agile Manifesto from 2001, and I think that's been a touchstone for many. It did drive big agile processes, really processes for accelerating the development of software, but it's worked its way into all of our disciplines. It certainly worked its way into project management, and it must, because how else are we going to bring that new software to the end users if we don't figure out how to operate in big A agile ways and little a agile ways? And change management has also concurrently been evolving. In organization development, the thought leadership regarding little a agility also continues to evolve, but it hasn't really been incorporated into a lot of the work that we're doing. If you could change the slide, please, Nick.
Sure.
So when I think about what have we learned, I think we've all resigned ourselves. I was saying accepted, but I think maybe even resigned ourselves that we have to recognize the acceleration of the velocity of change. We've tried to build our processes lighter, more iterative, more experimental. I'm not sure that we've really expedited any of our processes in that sort of rush to take theory and turn it into process. I've learned several processes. I'm sure that you all have too. I continue to try and integrate them into my work, but what I find is it's really not enough. Many of these new approaches still struggle to drive business results. Our teams struggle to adopt our own processes fast enough and widely enough, and to drive the business results reliably enough. So what I look at is, how can the Agile model and the related programs help us to improve the way we execute on transformation? And for me, it's really around the mindsets, capabilities, and behaviors required to incorporate agility. Nick, if you could share the next slide, please. So this slide really shows you some of the ways that I've been incorporating the Agile model into the work that I do. This is an example of how a delivery team, a portfolio or a program, or even a project can incorporate the Agile model in order to improve delivery effectiveness. It really starts with understanding the nature of the change that we are implementing, not the individual project per se, which is where we often start with our change management work, but really sort of zooming up to look at, what is the business trying to accomplish? What is our strategy? What are the characteristics of that strategy? Is it incremental? Is it transformational? How are we delivering? Is it PDLC? Is it agile? What is our delivery focus? Are we going to operate as a high-performing team? Are we going to focus on mitigating delivery risk? Are we going to focus on expediting and securing benefits realization? All of these can be used to sort of right-size the agility approach for the strategy and the team. Then what I'd like to do is, having sort of really established what's the right fit. We don't want to apply the Agile model to a very modest and simple software upgrade, but we do want to apply it to changes where we need first our project teams and then our targets to change the way that they think and operate. So then I'd like to introduce the Agile model to the delivery team. And we look at the strategy dimensions, what I just talked about, what kind of change is it, how are we delivering, and talk about the key capabilities from the Agile model that are relevant and important for us to really build strength in order to deliver effectively. When we have that kind of alignment, we can then execute the leadership agility profiles, preferably with a 360 view, and look at team assessments. And we want to engage the key participants in the delivery team. So that includes people with titles like VP Transformation, or Business Sponsor, or Executive Delivery Lead, or Program Delivery Lead, or Project Manager, or Business Owner, and often involves some of the really key delivery subject matter experts. And we do the leadership agility profiles, and they can learn about what are their strengths, just as we saw with Kumar and Susan in the examples, and where are their opportunities for development. We can look at the overall team and say, hey, we're really strong in these areas, but we're really not so strong in these areas. And how does that map to what we're trying to deliver? Where do we really need to develop? With that shared understanding, we can move into building agility. We can run specific leader coaching, structured and real-time feedback, and we can run team workshops on key capabilities. And of course, because we're going to operate in this agile way, we're going to monitor our results and calibrate our approach as we go forward. So that's really one example of how we can improve our delivery effectiveness. And I think about, if we did this for a few projects, how much stronger the delivery of our teams are going to get time over time. And then, at some point, perhaps we don't really need to do it as explicitly anymore as we build this capability into the organization. When I think about building it into the organization, though, I come at it potentially from a different direction. more of an organization development direction. And think about all of the many places that we can build agility into systems and structures. It can begin top down by incorporating agility into the organization's visions and values and in organization design. But to have teeth, we really need it to show up in leadership competencies and in performance management and recruiting. We actually had worked with a client over the past year or two that compared their leadership competencies to the Agile model and found that they had already identified 14 of the 15 capabilities in their leadership competencies, which was great. And of course, it prompted a discussion about the 15th one, which was also great. You know, as we look at conversations with HR representatives who are looking for a model that maps perfectly to their existing organization, it's not always a perfect fit. The only way really to do that is to build your own or customize. However, many have found great value by leveraging a proven model and just letting leaders know that this is one model of several that the organization is using, which is really the reality of how we all operate today, as we all come to the table with different models in mind. And when we share one, we then have that shared frame of reference. So when I think about how could we get started with building agility into our organizations, you know, sometimes we want to look for smaller places to start. As Cindy was talking about the elephant eater, you know, we could consider using this kind of program in a hypo program where we could run the leadership agility profile 360s and offer coaching for the hypo team. And we've done that too. We might look for a division where a very large transformation is planned and build that into the foundational work of preparing that organization to do the transformation that they need in order to be successful. Or we might look for a transformation that is struggling, and I've done that too. Those are harder, of course, and always, I think, we face the challenge of getting our delivery leaders' attention to doing a program that they may not view as directly in line with their delivery, even though they see the value of improving capability. So the other thing that I do is seed it in to a lot of other places. You know, I've used the model itself in high-performing team presentations as an example of a way to get the participants familiar with some of the concepts and maybe even do a little bit of sneaky priming. So where else can we start using the agility model to drive better results for our organization? I'm going to turn it back to Nick, and Nick's going to talk about the After Action Agility Program. Back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that perspective, that personal perspective. One of the things that we thought might be useful for you is to really look more in depth at the application of this in an experience that we're all impacted by, and that is COVID-19 and what we're going through, whether we're a consultant or whether we're internal within an organization. We have had to deal with taking action based on COVID-19, and now a number of organizations are starting to think about what does it look like beyond COVID-19? What is that new world of work? What does that future work look like? And also, how do we prepare ourselves, not for just other pandemics, but other disruptions that are be coming our way? So we put together something called an After Action Agility virtual program. And you can see that the ideal is to have 20 participants. It could be you and a cross-section of your organization of 20 people. It could be smaller groups of 4 groups of 5 from different organizations, so that you select 4 others and participate with 3 other organizations as part of this, this after action agility program. All done virtually, with the idea that some of this does require some pre-work to really look at and ask yourself the question, how did my organization deal with COVID-19? What are the things that they dealt with as it related to customers, suppliers, our employees? How often did we communicate? Were we clear with our communications? There's some pre-reading in terms of just finding out a bit more about leadership agility. And then you also complete a self-assessment in terms of your own personal leadership agility in dealing with COVID-19. How well did you anticipate change? How well did you generate confidence? So we're looking at it both from an organizational level as well as your own individual level. We come together, so to speak, in a virtual Zoom meeting where all 20 would come together. And there is dialogue and presentation about what did we learn, what are some of the information, a bit more information about the Agile model, yet some of which you've already gone through, a discussion of the Leadership Agility White Paper, and really an overview, of the Leadership Agility Report. And a great deal of emphasis really focused on what the groups are going to be doing in separate Zoom meetings. There'll be 5 per small breakout group in Zoom meetings to really start addressing what is the aggregate of this after action review look like. Now, these 5 people, remember, all part of the same organization. So you're consolidating your after action review so that in fact you look at what did we do, and then you're also using the lens of the Agile model in terms of how well did we anticipate change, generate confidence, et cetera, with what we implemented regarding COVID-19. You'll also share the aggregate results of the Leadership Agility Profile self-assessment. You'll look at consolidating from the 5 individual inputs, and you'll look at what are the themes that seem to be coming out of that. Do we need to focus more on anticipating change as leaders? Do we need to focus in on generating confidence, and how do we do that? All of this information is put together in a summary fashion. And you'll then spend time, again, still in a small group, focusing in on what's next and how do you plan for the future. So the idea is to start working on a particular disruption that you know that needs to be addressed. It might deal with cybersecurity. It may deal with working virtually. You've got now maybe a greater, broader mix of a talent portfolio that includes full-time, part-time, as well as gig employees, gig workers as well. So how do you deal with all of those in the future, of your organization? So the final 2.5-hour Zoom meeting then is essentially a presentation by each of these small groups. Each small group basically provides an after-action agility strengths and weaknesses. What did we do well, not so well, as you look at it through the lens of the Agile model. And also the same is true in terms of the aggregate leadership agility profile results. What are our strengths, developmental areas, et cetera, and what we do. Also, the third portion of the presentation is really about future planning, and it really gets at example here that's presented is virtual work. What is it that we need to be doing to anticipate the changes required in working virtually, a stronger representation of working virtually, in our future, in the future way that we work? How do we generate confidence with not only our leaders, but our employees? Leaders in terms of how leaders need to shift their approach to leading in a more virtual environment, conducting meetings virtually, et cetera. So the idea being that you leave with not only a self-insight in terms of your own leadership agility, but also the beginning of what are some future planning for the future in terms of what that future world of work looks like and how you're applying agility to that so that you're building capability for future disruptions as they come along. Wanted to also share with you a client example, Turner Broadcasting, we've worked with for about 5 years. And Turner was really wrestling with digital disruption and what digital media, you see the brands that Turner represents, CNN, TBS. Many of us have been spending more time watching some of those things these days. But with all of that said, they approached their transformation at multiple levels, at an individual leader level, as well as a seminar that was built around focus on the Agile model applied to leadership. And then a third component of it, which was focused in on their business units and really identifying what the organizational agility was, business unit by business unit. As Gail mentioned, and in this particular case, the focus was on 40 high potentials each year. So there were really 5 cohort groups, 40 each over a 5-year period of time in the transformation for Turner. What we also did is we certified internal coaches for using the Leadership Agility Profile 360 as part of the 360 assessment that each leader received. So they were working on their own individual development plan while they were also in this 3-day program. 3 to 6 months later, the organizational agility assessment was conducted business unit by business unit, so that now you have leaders that really have a better handle on what agility was all about. Now it's applied to their own business unit and to their own organization. Really was one of the more successful transformation efforts that we had. So that really is a summary that we wanted to provide you today. We hope that we achieved some of that. And Cindy, I think you probably are kind of lead us in some of the Q&A that we may have as a result.
And we do have quite a few great questions. So Nick, first of all, Phil brought up this question. Could you comment on the changes required to reward mechanisms to enable this agility model? For example, encouraging risk-taking in frontline colleagues.
Yeah, some of the things are really down at a very individual level. It's a great question, though, Phil. Encouraging the risk-taking can be almost as simple as if, and I'll use an example to illustrate this. I was doing some executive coaching for the chief technology officer for a Fortune 500 company, high-tech company. And this particular individual was exceptionally bright. And everyone knew he was bright. He knew that he was bright. And 99% of the time, he had the right answer. The dilemma is that 99% of the time, he had the right answer. So his team meetings, he'd gather his team together, and he would put out an opportunity, any suggestions on how we may attack this particular issue or area, etc. And after a few suggestions, he would indicate, well, here's how I would approach it. So that then became the approach taken. So what's wrong with that approach? Well, he wasn't encouraging much risk-taking if it wasn't exactly the way he would do it. So this ended up as part of executive coaching that was needed to really encourage him to listen more, to be able and willing to accept some other recommendations. It may not be 100% what his recommendation would have been, but it would have been close to that. And so his focus was to be mentoring and monitoring these individuals, because his primary responsibility was to grow future leadership. I know that doesn't necessarily reflect the specific kind of rewards, etc., but it's rewarding in the sense that it's encouraging more risk-taking, it's encouraging and reacting to others' ideas, that there's willingness to accept some of that and willingness to take it to a test.
Excellent. So related question, Nick, once an assessment has been done and some gaps have been identified, is there a maximum number of areas for a leader to focus on?
Yeah, that's another great question. And part of it is as you do coaching, and many of you are probably experienced coaches, you can just overwhelm somebody with with a whole host of, okay, we've got 15 things that you need to be working on. Well, the reality is that we're not able to truly focus. So work with them, and it's in a collaborative way. You're not a doctor saying, okay, here's here's the prescription, go deal with these three, and that's it. What you're really doing is providing them feedback. You're working through the data. You're collaborating with them in terms of which ones are going to have the most impact most immediately for you and what you're trying to achieve. As in the case of the chief technology officer, it had everything to do with listening more and encouraging and engaging his, and it was a male, encouraging his team members to contribute more in terms of their thoughts and ideas, et cetera. And so the great deal of focus on building out listening skills, building out engagement, kinds of behaviors that were really important for him.
Excellent. So a little different perspective. Paul asks, one of the challenges that practitioners often wrestle with is in doing a thorough enough analysis early in the intervention to understand what your best outcome is and to effectively help shape the most effective enhancement strategy to get there. Too often, we fast path tactics without understanding where the organization's strengths and blind spots are. Would one use the Agile model as a back office analysis tool to take a more data-based approach to inform an organization's strategic needs and even forecast some core technical requirements?
Wow, what a question. Okay, so
positioning.
Yes, and again, the value that we believe in the Agile model is that, again, it depends on the context, whether it's individual, team, or organization. We've done a substantial number of organizational transformation work. We have something that we refer to as an organizational agility audit it is a data gathering process of both interviews as well as online assessment. What that does, and I think exactly as the questioner laid out, it establishes that baseline, and it establishes and gets in this case, it gets the leadership team involved in identifying, well, what are the gaps? What are the gaps in terms of what we're doing already? Are we missing the boat on anticipating change? Are we constantly getting surprised? And that's coming in through interviews as well as the data in terms of the survey. We thought we did a good job of communicating our vision, but we haven't gotten really the right kind of engagement of those. So we find that out in the interviews and the data that's been gathered. So what results from this data synthesis, and again, it's all about how do we engage this team in collaborating on coming up with the focus that needs to be placed on what are the critical few things that are really necessary to close some of the gaps. One of the things often that occurs when you think at a strategic level and even building out the strategy of the organization is to what degree is the organization utilizing scenario planning and scenario thinking. So we've done a fair amount of work with organizations to not just have that one strategy, but at least have gone through the process of scenario planning so that they've thought about, are we always going to have the same technical resources available to us? Are we always going to have the same suppliers available? What happens if we don't have that supplier network available to us? And some are finding that, just recently in the COVID-19, many organizations were finding out that their suppliers in China and the whole supply chain were really breaking down in terms of the ability for them to be able to deliver. Hopefully that's some of the answer.
Excellent. So we can take one more question before we get to our closing remarks. How to expand the understanding of little a agile versus big A agile? The term's been floating around organizations. Leaders have been using it. I'm not quite sure if they're grasping the difference between the two. If you had to have an elevator speech with a leader, what are the top 3 points that you can use to help delineate this?
Gail, did you want to give it a shot, and then I can give it a shot?
I don't know if I have a top 3. For me, I think if you don't have little a agility, you can't have big A agile.
I like it.
I think, we, and there is an application for this work, for the agile model work in supporting big A agile implementation, if you can follow that, right? Because I can think of a couple of organizations where I've worked where the organization has tried to roll out Big A Agile, and meaning Agile software development and Agile project management. And they've done this by modifying their processes for doing the work. However, that doesn't change the way people think about their work. And inevitably, the first questions that come up are things like, well, how are we going to report on our status report? How are we doing if, we're doing an MVP and we don't know what our next MVP is? So of course we want those questions, but they're also a sign that people really haven't begun to adopt the key capabilities like visioning, sensing, and monitoring, about aligning, about a bias for action. Those symptoms show up in the questions. And I often think if we could put them together, then we'd really have something powerful. So that's my lens. I don't know, Nick and Cindy, if you have a different perspective.
Let me try maybe a quick version of this too, and I've shared some of this in previous sessions, presentations, et cetera, that the primary difference in the reason that we established the Agile model and the framework and the way we did is really about capability building for future change, as well as the change that you're involved in. So it has everything to do with whether it's the marketplace, whether it's internal to the organization. What are we doing to anticipate the changes? What are the changes that are coming about internally? If we're a project manager or program manager, how well are we anticipating some of the changes? It may be financial changes, it may be a shift of focus, maybe a strategy focus. How are we making ourselves aware of that to know how that's going to impact the project work that we're doing? So that's down at an individual level and an individual project level. So it's the anticipation of change, which is critically important. And it's about, it really is about capability building. It's the little a, or the little a of the Agile model, is really focused in on, it's building capability for ongoing change. And ongoing change may be technology change, it may be people change, it may be millennials working with baby boomers, a whole host of change. How do we build that capability with individual teams and organizations? It's more of a people focus than it is a tool or a technique focus.
I love that, Nick. Thanks.
Yeah, and the only thing I can add is, when we come to the small A, and I love what Gail said, you have to have the small A agility before you can do the big A agile, is there is no structure forms. There's no, it's not it's a mindset change that must occur long before any software projects are contemplated. These are things Agile software projects fall out of small agile thinking. So that's where we get back to the capability. It's a mindset change before any actions are taken to execute on very specific deliverables.
Really great questions, everyone. Thank you so much for submitting those. Really appreciate it.
So we're almost at time. I just want to add a couple of closing remarks. I want to thank Gail and Nick for sharing their insights with us. We're going to send a copy of the presentation to all attendees, and that's where you'll find all of our contact information. Please visit Nick's website for more information on the suite of programs designed to drive agility if you're interested in becoming a certified affiliate. If you're interested in a leadership agility profile development experience for yourself, your leaders, or your team, you can reach out to Gail or myself to discuss the options. In closing, just consider where you are right now. Maybe your leaders are in need of some focused agility development. Perhaps a project team is derailing, or your organization is fully engaged in a transformation. We encourage you to take the bold step to explore how to develop your team, yourself, your leader, your organization through agility, and to thrive as a result. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Lots of thanks coming through on the chat. Thanks for a great session. Thank you. Thank you. Let's catch up soon. That's for you, Gail.
Yes. I see Robin managed to get in right at the very end. I think
Yeah.
they had some trouble at the beginning, so maybe they might join one of the other sessions.
Yeah, I think that was a benefit for us sending out all of the links in one shot, because they can actually see that there's another session they can immediately jump into.
Yeah, I resent them to Robin as well. All right, you guys. Well, Nick and Cindy, I will talk to you at 4:30.
Excellent.